The Pacific was a graveyard of steel long before dawn broke on that December morning. The waves rolled black and slow, as if hiding the memories of every sinking ship beneath their surface. Beneath those waters, far deeper than any human eye could see, a single American submarine sliced through the silence like a shadow with purpose. Its engines hummed low, its crew whispering through tight compartments that smelled of oil, sweat, and metal. They had been submerged for almost 2 days, stalking through a region so heavily patrolled that most captains avoided it entirely. But Commander Lewis Harding wasn't like most captains. He believed that somewhere out there, hidden behind the shifting fog and radio static, a Japanese convoy was about to step into his crosshairs. And if his instincts were right, this convoy was not just another transport. This was a lifeline, one of the last major resupply lines Japan was gambling everything on to stabilize the chaos in the Pacific. The Americans didn't know how big it was. They didn't know what was guarding it. But Harding had a feeling, one of those quiet, gut-deep instincts every legendary submarine commander had, that something enormous was moving across the dark ocean. The sonar operator listened through the headset, tapping one finger nervously against the console. "Captain," picking up faint screws, multiple signatures, speed steady, direction southeast. Harding walked over, his eyes fixed not on the screen but on the operator's expression. "How many?" he asked. "Hard to tell yet, sir. Could be 5, maybe 7. Harding shook his head slowly. The operator swallowed. "Or more." The control room fell silent. Every man understood what that meant. A small escort group makes noise. A big convoy sounds like a heartbeat. This was a thunderstorm rolling underwater. Harding lifted the binoculars, though he knew there was nothing to see from periscope depth yet. He simply needed the ritual, the motion, the breath, the focus. "All ahead 1/3, he ordered. "Make us a ghost." The boat slowed. The hum quieted. The men barely moved as if afraid their heartbeats could echo against the hull. For the next 30 minutes, the submarine drifted at minimal speed, letting the ocean carry her forward, silent, patient, hungry. Then, as if the sea itself shifted, the sonar operator stiffened. "Sir, multiple escorts. I count 3 destroyers, speed high." Harding felt the tension in the room rise like steam. Destroyers meant depth charges. Depth charges meant no mistakes. "And behind them, sir, I'm getting large signatures. Very large." Harding's pulse quickened. Large signatures meant cargo ships or tankers. Maybe troop carriers. Maybe ammunition ships. When you sink an ammo ship, the explosion reminds the ocean who's in charge. Harding leaned in, his eyes narrowing. "Range. About 8,000 yards and closing. Convoy is moving fast. They don't expect subs in this sector." Harding almost smiled. Perfect. The Japanese believed the Americans would never risk a lone submarine this deep into the Empire's backyard. But Harding wasn't interested in safe bets. He was interested in results. The sub glided forward, her steel hull cutting through silence like a knife through wet cloth. Men held their breath as they listened to the convoy getting louder. More engines, more propellers, more metal pushing through water. It felt like being in the woods, listening to an army march past your hiding place. Then finally, Harding raised the periscope. The scope pierced the surface with barely a ripple. Harding's eyes scanned a thin line of horizon, and there they were. At first, only shadows. Then outlines. Then shapes. A massive Japanese convoy. 10 ships at least. Maybe more. Tankers. Cargo haulers. Armored transports. And the escorts, sleek, sharp destroyers knife-cutting across the waves. Harding tightened his jaw. This wasn't a target. This was a feast. Yet even as he watched, he felt something strange. The convoy was too loose. Japanese formations were normally tight, disciplined. Here, the escorts looked tense, darting around as if they were trying to cover too much space. Something was off. Something wasn't normal. The first officer whispered behind him. "Captain, should we back off? Wait for nightfall." Harding didn't lower the periscope. "No, sir." Harding finally turned. "This convoy is running scared. Something has them on edge. And scared ships make mistakes." A murmur rippled through the control room. Harding lowered the periscope and exhaled. Battle stations. No shouting. No panic. Just a quiet tightening of muscles, a shift in posture, a ripple of determination through the cramped steel corridors. Men strapped themselves into seats, checked torpedo gyro angles, adjusted valves, recalibrated depth settings. Harding studied the maps again. Their position was good, very good. The escorts had left a blind spot on the port side of the second column. A gap big enough for one submarine to slip in, fire, and disappear. "Bring us to attack depth," Harding said. The ballast tanks hissed. The sub angled downward. Open bow caps. Metal groaned softly. Cold ocean water pressed harder against the hull, reminding them how deep they were going. Harding looked at the torpedo officer. "How many can we fire?" "All forward tubes ready, sir." "Load the steam torps." "I want the fast ones." The officer hesitated. "That'll expose our position the moment we fire." Harding didn't blink. "We won't be here when they react." The sub leveled out. The captain raised the periscope again. The convoy was closer now, so close he could see men walking on deck, unaware of the predator just beneath their feet. "Angle on the bow?" he asked. 080, sir." Harding exhaled slowly. "Flood tubes 1 through 4. The orders echoed through metal corridors, each word like a heartbeat. "Set depth. Ready to fire." Sweat beaded on brows. The submarine drifted forward. "Targets locked," the torpedo officer said. Harding whispered, "Fire." A jolt. Then another. Then another. For torpedoes shot through the water, leaving ghostly white trails as they raced toward the convoy. Harding didn't wait to watch. "Dive. Take us deep. All ahead flank." The engines roared. The submarine plunged downward, disappearing into blackness just as confusion erupted above. And then a thunderous explosion shook the sea. Then a second. Then a third. Harding grabbed the periscope handles as the sound vibrated through the hull. A Japanese transport erupted into flame, split open by the torpedo impact. Another ship, possibly a tanker, began listing hard to one side. The fourth torpedo slammed into a destroyer's bow, snapping the front of the ship like a twig. Harding felt his pulse racing, but he kept his voice calm. "Brace for counterattack." The crew didn't need to be told twice. Above, Japanese destroyers scrambled in panic, trying to locate the unseen attacker. Harding waited, listened, felt the weight of the ocean around him. Then, ping. A single sonar ping cut through the silence like a knife. Then another. Then 10 more. The destroyers had found something. Harding whispered, "Hold steady." The men froze. Depth charges began falling. 1, 2, 10, then 20. The ocean lit up with explosions. The submarine rocked violently, bulkheads groaning. Lights flickered. Tools fell to the floor. Men clenched their jaws, gripping anything bolted down. Harding stood firm. He'd survived depth charge attacks before. But this was different. The Japanese were firing wildly, desperately, terrified, because 3 of their ships were already burning. And they didn't know where the American sub was. Harding whispered, almost to himself, "They're scared." The sonar operator looked up. "Sir." Harding smiled faintly. "They're not hunting us. They're panicking." Another explosion rocked the hull, but softer this time. The charges were moving away, not toward them. Harding steadied himself. "I'll stop. Make us a rock." The engines quieted to a whisper. The submarine settled into the deep, becoming just another shadow in the black water. Up above, the Japanese kept firing blindly, terrified the submarine would strike again. They had no idea the sub was already repositioning, already preparing for the next attack, already turning this convoy into a disaster. Harding wiped sweat from his forehead. "Reload all tubes," he said calmly. "Round 2 begins when I say." The ocean around the Belau-class submarine had gone strangely calm, as if the sea itself were holding its breath. Inside the steel hull, the men felt the pressure of deep water settling over them like a silent weight. No one spoke now. They didn't need to. Every man aboard knew they were about to attempt something so reckless that no textbook, no admiral, no classroom at Annapolis would ever dare recommend it. But that was exactly why Dealey was willing to do it. While most commanders followed doctrine like a sacred scripture, Dealey used doctrine the way a sculptor used clay, something to shape, bend, and break when necessary. The sonar operator raised one finger, signaling a new contact, and the crew instinctively leaned toward him. The next second, the sound filled the room. Deep, rhythmic propeller beats, unmistakably heavy, unmistakably close. Destroyer escorts didn't sound like this. Merchant ships didn't sound like this. This was something bigger, faster, armed to the teeth. Dealey's jaw tightened. Another warship. Another predator. And they were hunting him. The men waited for his order, their minds already racing ahead of the situation. They were outnumbered. Outgunned. Every calculation said they were hopelessly trapped. But calculations didn't decide the outcome of battles. Decisions did. And Dealey always made the kind of decisions that left other submarine captains reading battle reports in disbelief. He whispered to the helmsman, "Bring her down." Just enough to disappear. The crew didn't question why only just enough. Going deeper would be safer. Going deeper was what every submarine on the planet would do when enemy warships were closing in. But Dealey didn't want safe. He wanted position. The bow dipped, the hull groaned, and the lights flickered as the submarine adjusted to a lower depth. Sonar pings rang out. 1, then 3, then 6, each ping hitting the hull like a hammer blow, echoing through the metal. The enemy was sweeping the ocean, searching for him with the precision of a surgeon. The crew clenched their jaws as the pings grew louder, sharper, closer. Dealey's eyes didn't budge from the sonar profile. His mind was drawing a battle map with every sound wave. He could picture the enemy's ship, its angle, its likely course, the slight variations in rhythm that told him exactly how fast it was moving. It wasn't enough to avoid detection. He had to maneuver into the perfect strike zone without the enemy ever suspecting it. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "We stay shallow. We let them think we're running. They'll charge in, and that's when they show their flank." The plan was so insane that half the crew didn't process it until after the words were spoken. They weren't hiding. They were luring the hunter closer. The sonar pings suddenly sharpened, direct hits. The enemy destroyer had locked onto them. The depth gauge ticked. The pipes rattled. Tension shrank the entire submarine until it felt like the walls themselves were holding their breath. The men listened to the rising thunder of propellers overhead, each rotation bringing the destroyer closer to prime firing position. Dealey raised his hand. Every man on the torpedo crew straightened instantly. Not yet. Not yet. A shrill metallic groan vibrated through the hull. The destroyer was nearly above them now, roaring across the surface like a storm. The crew braced for the inevitable splash of depth charges. But Dealey didn't flinch. His voice came out low, steady, almost calm. "Stand by." The propellers grew louder still, then louder, then impossibly loud, making the hull tremble with pressure. The men felt the water compressing around them. One wrong move would turn their submarine into a steel coffin. Dealey exhaled once. Fire. The torpedo room erupted into motion. The metallic hiss, the violent kickback, the thunderous whoosh, every sound punched through the submarine. The torpedo shot forward, cutting through the dark ocean like a streak of vengeance. It vanished into the deep with a deadly purpose. Dealey didn't wait for confirmation. He barked, "Hard to port. Dive, dive." The submarine tilted violently as the diving planes bit into the water. The men grabbed onto pipes and handles as the boat plunged deeper. Above them, the destroyer continued its sweep, unaware that a torpedo was racing straight toward the vulnerable midsection of its hull. Seconds crawled. The crew felt every heartbeat like a drum. Then, a muffled boom rolled through the water. Not a depth charge. Not an underwater rock slide. This was the deep, sickening thud of steel being torn open underwater. The men looked at one another. They didn't cheer. Not yet. Dealey narrowed his eyes. Reload the tubes. Because this was only the first kill of the night. And he could feel it. More warships were coming. This wasn't a battle anymore. This was a hunt. And Sam Dealey was just getting started. The sonar operator suddenly stiffened. "Captain, multiple contacts. Fast. Heavy. I count 3. No. 4. Warships closing." The temperature in the sub seemed to drop. For destroyers converging on one submarine. Any other captain would immediately retreat to deep water, running, dodging, praying. Dealey instead turned toward the helmsman with that same fearless certainty. "Take us straight into them." The crew stared at him. Straight into the center of the formation? Into a kill zone? Into 4 ships designed specifically to wipe submarines off the map? Dealey didn't blink. "They'll never expect a submarine to attack from the front," he said softly. "And that's why it will work." Above them, the destroyers tightened formation. Sonar pings intensified. The enemy wasn't confused anymore. They were angry, humiliated, and ready to obliterate whatever had just sunk one of their own. The crew braced. Dealey leaned in. The hunt continued. The ocean around the submarine grew heavier as the storm clouds tightened overhead, turning the Pacific into a vast, darkened chamber of echoing waves. In that suffocating gloom, the crew of the U.S. submarine felt the weight of something far larger than a mission. They were creeping toward waters where ships didn't just disappear silently. They were erased violently. The Japanese destroyers patrolling the region were notorious for hunting subs with a kind of relentless instinct, sharp and merciless. Every sailor on board had heard stories of American boats crushed under a wall of depth charges before the men inside even knew they had been spotted. And yet, despite all of that fear, all of that pressure, the submarine kept going, slicing through the deep like a black shadow no one could trace. Inside the control room, red lights painted the crew's faces with a feverish glow. Everyone whispered instead of talking. Every sound mattered. Every vibration meant something. The sonar operator was sweating through his headphones, his fingers trembling slightly over the controls. He wasn't scared for himself. He was scared of being wrong. One mistake in these waters meant they wouldn't just die, they would vanish without a ripple. The Japanese Navy was growing increasingly certain that someone, some unseen predator, was stalking their supply lanes. And they were bringing in faster destroyers, sharper listening hydrophones, and crews trained specifically to crush submarines before they could escape. The commander watched his men with the expression of someone carrying more weight than he could ever confess. Commanding a submarine was like balancing on a blade. Push too hard, and you expose yourself. Hesitate too long, and the moment slips away. But right now, the Pacific was offering something rare. 5 heavily loaded enemy ships, tankers, transports, and an escort, lined up in a dark corridor of water like sheep waiting for the wolf. It was a chance that might never come again. But to strike at them, to take them all down, he would have to risk everything. They were deep in enemy territory, with destroyers prowling close, and the slightest sound would bring death crashing down from above. The first officer leaned forward, keeping his voice low. "Sir, if we go for all 5, they'll hit us back hard. They'll be on top of us in seconds." The commander nodded once, slowly. He knew. The destroyers guarding the convoy weren't there to scare submarines. They were there to kill them. But the convoy was too valuable, too heavy with military supplies, too critical for Japan's war machine. If they destroyed it here, at this moment, it wouldn't be just a victory. It would be a message that a single American submarine could strike where no battleship, no air raid, no fleet could reach. A message Japan was absolutely not prepared to hear. The submarine slid deeper, gliding like a ghost under the waves. The engines were brought to a crawl until the boat vibrated only slightly, just enough to keep her maneuvering in the crushing darkness. Men held their breath as though even exhaling too loudly could betray their position. Above them, the convoy moved in a slow, rhythmic pattern, propeller beats like distant drums. The sound of multiple ships together wasn't chaotic. It was hypnotic, like a pulsing heart. The crew could almost visualize them, massive steel beasts pushing through the Pacific, unaware of the eyes lurking below. The commander raised his hand, signaling for a slow turn. The submarine angled itself until its torpedo tubes were facing the perfect blind spot in the enemy formation. It was a spot no destroyer could cover without breaking the convoy's protective ring. A spot the commander had memorized from countless simulations. They were going to strike from the darkness where no one expected danger to exist. It wasn't luck. It was calculation, precision, and an edge of boldness that bordered on insanity. "Stand by," whispered the torpedo officer, his voice steady despite the tension tightening the room. He adjusted his firing solution with quick, practiced movements. The math was unforgiving. Their target was moving. The water distorted everything. The submarine itself was drifting ever so slightly with the currents. One small error and the torpedo would miss entirely, or worse, alert the entire convoy. But not tonight. The commander exhaled slowly, his voice barely audible. "Fire." The submarine jolted ever so slightly as the torpedo left its tube, slicing forward into the black water. The crew didn't speak. They didn't even blink. They listened. They felt. Seconds stretched like minutes. Then came the faint tremor through the hull, a low, distant thud, like someone punching the ocean itself. A hit. But before they could celebrate, another sound broke through the water, a sound every submariner feared more than any explosion. The angry whir of a destroyer turning hard toward their position. The Japanese had heard something, and they were coming. The commander didn't flinch. Reload. Fire again. He wasn't aiming for survival anymore. He was aiming to break the convoy completely before the hunters arrived. The second torpedo slid silently into the water, almost invisible in the black depths. The sonar operator's knuckles were white on the console as he tracked its course, following the underwater shadow as it closed on its target. The first destroyer had started to swing, hydrophones straining for any hint of where the shot had come from. Its engine screamed faintly as it accelerated toward the perceived danger. The crew of the submarine felt the walls of the steel hull tighten around them, every heartbeat amplified against the pressurized hull. Time had warped into a single, endless moment where everything hung on a razor-thin thread. The second explosion hit with a deep, resonating force. Water erupted along the destroyer's starboard side, flinging debris into the storm-tossed waves. The convoy jolted as sailors scrambled for their stations. Orders were shouted in Japanese, heavy with panic and disbelief. The submarine shivered as the shockwave rolled through the water, but it held its course, almost daring the surface ships to find it. One by one, the torpedoes began to work their way toward the remaining targets, each carrying the deadly promise of steel and fire. The commander and his men held the tension like a living thing, feeling every vibration, every tremor, every murmur of the ocean around them. This was a battle waged in silence, unseen, and yet with consequences that would echo for miles. The third torpedo left its tube, cutting through the water with deadly precision. The target was a heavily laden transport ship, its deck stacked with crates of munitions and supplies vital to Japan's war effort. A perfect strike here could cripple the logistical chain for weeks. The crew of the submarine watched, listening for the telltale deep rumble of metal being torn apart, and then they felt it. The water above erupted as the torpedo found its mark. The ship shuddered violently, smoke and debris belching into the sky as the explosion ripped through its cargo hold. Waves cascaded over the deck, and the crew on board scrambled for lifeboats, unaware of the predator lying beneath the surface, still calculating, still preparing for the next strike. The tension inside the submarine was almost unbearable. Every eye was fixed on the sonar, every ear tuned to the sound of the waves. The commander's mind was moving faster than the torpedoes themselves, predicting movements, calculating trajectories, anticipating reactions. The destroyers were no longer just ships. They were hunters. They were now aware that they were being hunted. And in that awareness, there was a deadly dance about to unfold, a contest of wit, patience, and nerve. Reload. Third tube, the commander whispered, his voice calm but edged with urgency. The crew moved with precision born of months at sea, each action a small miracle of coordination under extreme pressure. The torpedo was prepared, aimed at the fourth target in the convoy. A freighter, bulky and slow, an easy target if everything went as planned. The officer adjusted the settings, compensating for current, drift, and the slight roll of the submarine itself. Calculations were double-checked, triple-checked. There was no room for error. In these waters, error meant death, not just for the crew, but for the mission and the lives of countless others depending on the success of this strike. The final torpedo tube was prepared as the fourth torpedo launched. A hiss of water followed its departure, and the submarine seemed to hold its breath along with the men inside. Outside, the convoy's chaos was escalating. Ships were maneuvering frantically, depth charges being prepped and dropped, but the submarine stayed in the shadows, unseen, calculating every move. The waves crashed against the hull as the boat angled itself for the last strike. The fifth and final target, a smaller escort vessel that had been guarding the convoy's flank, was fast but lightly armored. Its captain was desperate to protect the other ships, unaware that the predator beneath them was already several steps ahead. As the fifth torpedo cut through the water, the commander felt a rare flicker of hope. If this worked, if all 5 targets went down, it would be a staggering blow to the enemy's operations, a demonstration of American ingenuity, courage, and audacity. But the destroyers were closing in. The sonar operator called out distant engine noises, closer than ever before. The tension inside the hull was nearly unbearable. Every crew member knew that discovery now would mean instant death. Every nerve was stretched to the limit. The explosions came in quick succession, each one a hammer strike against the enemy's pride and preparation. Debris tore through the night, flames flickering against the rolling waves, and the convoy was thrown into chaos. The destroyers tried to retaliate, deploying depth charges with increasing frequency, but the submarine had already begun to maneuver silently away, threading through underwater currents with a ghostly precision. The crew remained tense but focused, knowing that any mistake now would undo everything. They moved through the storm like shadows, invisible, deadly, unstoppable. Hours passed as the submarine navigated the treacherous waters. The storm overhead had grown more violent, winds tearing at the vessel's conning tower, waves threatening to engulf the small craft. But inside, the crew was calm, professional, calculating each move with military precision. They had struck a staggering blow, yet the ocean gave no applause, only the endless, merciless waves. In the quiet moments, the men allowed themselves brief glances at one another. Faces pale, eyes wide with the knowledge that they had just survived something extraordinary. They had changed the course of this engagement with precision, skill, and nerve that few could comprehend. By dawn, the storm had begun to subside. The sun rose through the broken clouds, casting a pale light over the ocean. The convoy was shattered, wreckage and smoke marking the path of destruction. From a distance, it looked almost surreal, like a scene from another world. But for those in the submarine, it was intensely real. They had faced the deadliest hunters in the Pacific, relied on nothing but skill, calculation, and a single chance. And they had prevailed. The commander allowed himself the briefest smile, knowing that this night would be remembered, not just for the destruction wrought, but for the courage, audacity, and precision it required. The submarine slipped away from the site of the attack, disappearing into the endless blue, leaving chaos behind. The crew finally allowed themselves to breathe, to relax just slightly, knowing they had accomplished something extraordinary. Every man on board had been tested beyond measure. Every decision, every calculation, every moment of nerve had been stretched to its limit. And yet, here they were, alive, victorious. A single submarine, a handful of men, had struck a blow that would echo through the Pacific for months to come. But the ocean was far from forgiving. Every action had consequences, and as the submarine made its slow, careful retreat, the crew knew that this was only one engagement in a much larger war. The Japanese would regroup. They would hunt, and the men aboard this submarine would have to remain vigilant, ready, and unbroken for the battles yet to come. And in that knowledge lay both fear and pride, a duality that would mark every submariner in the years to come. The morning sun rose weakly over the Pacific, cutting through clouds that still carried remnants of the night's storm. The waves, though calmer, still tossed the submarine like a small cork, reminding the crew that even in victory, the ocean demanded respect. Inside the vessel, the air was thick with dampness and tension, mixed with the faint metallic scent of machinery and the salt-laden breath of men who had stared death in the face and survived. Every man aboard was exhausted, but none dared relax completely. There was no room for complacency in these waters, no room for error, no mercy for hesitation. The submarine had become a ghost in the open sea. Above them, scattered pieces of the destroyed convoy floated helplessly, smoke curling into the sky. From the deck of the enemy ships that had survived, the cries of sailors filled the air, cries of shock, fear, and disbelief. Their formation was broken, their morale shattered. Intelligence reports would later call it one of the most devastating ambushes of the Pacific campaign, yet for the men inside the submarine, it had been an orchestrated ballet of tension and precision. Each torpedo, each maneuver, had been planned with meticulous care, and now the echoes of their efforts reverberated silently through the waves. In the control room, the commander studied the charts with relentless focus. The water currents were unpredictable, shifted by the recent storm, and yet, he knew that navigation could not falter. One wrong calculation, one misread depth, and the submarine could be crushed against underwater terrain or exposed to the hunters that now scoured the sea for survivors. The sonar operator continued his vigil, ears straining to catch even the faintest hum of distant engines. Every ping, every ripple of sound in the water was a potential threat. The tension inside the vessel was palpable, a living, breathing force pressing against every man's chest. Meanwhile, below deck, the engine room churned relentlessly. Diesel engines rumbled, belts whined, and the heat rose in waves. But the men there worked in perfect synchronicity. Their hands moved with precision, adjusting valves, monitoring gauges, and keeping the vessel alive. They were the heartbeat of the submarine, the silent force that allowed the hunters above to remain hidden and deadly. The smell of oil mixed with the salty air created an almost hypnotic environment, where danger was constant but survival depended on a calm, methodical mind. Any lapse, any hesitation, could doom the vessel in an instant. As the submarine moved further from the site of destruction, the commander reflected on the night's events. The success had been extraordinary, but the cost was measured not just in the lives of the enemy, but in the mental strain upon his own crew. Submarine warfare was unlike any other form of combat. Here, in the crushing depths, isolation magnified every sound, every decision, every mistake. The enemy was often unseen, and yet every choice carried life or death weight. The men lived with constant awareness, balancing fear and courage in a tension that could fray nerves and test loyalty. Every glance at a fellow crewman was a reminder that each man's skill, each man's calm, was as crucial as any torpedo or deck gun. Hours passed in tense silence, broken only by the mechanical hum of the submarine and occasional whispered updates. The crew ate little, drank little, conserving energy and focus for the battles yet to come. As the day wore on, the submarine approached a narrow channel known for Japanese patrols. Here, the ocean was shallow, the currents unpredictable, and any misstep could reveal their presence. The commander tightened his grip on the helm, eyes scanning the sonar, calculating every possibility, weighing every risk. The men trusted him implicitly. They had to. In these waters, trust was as vital as skill. From above the surface, Japanese aircraft began to stir. Distant hums became audible to trained ears, the faint brush of propellers against the wind sending subtle vibrations through the submarine's hull. The sonar operator's face was pale with concentration, interpreting every signal, distinguishing friend from foe, calculating distance and speed. The enemy had begun to respond, sending planes to scout the wreckage and search for survivors. Every step forward was fraught with danger. Detection could mean instant annihilation. The tension in the vessel was no longer just psychological. It was a tangible, suffocating presence. At this critical moment, the commander made a daring decision. Instead of retreating to open waters where depth could conceal them, he chose to navigate closer to a series of jagged reefs, hoping the natural terrain would act as a shield against aerial reconnaissance. The crew murmured quietly among themselves, some with apprehension, some with awe at the audacity of their leader. Every maneuver here was dangerous. The seabed was a minefield of coral and rocks capable of tearing the hull apart. But the decision was strategic. The enemy might anticipate flight to deep waters, but this move was unpredictable, potentially saving the submarine from a devastating airstrike. As the submarine slipped through the reef, the sonar picked up faint pings, distant patrols, hunting for the lost convoy and its hidden predator. The crew held their breath, knowing that detection would be catastrophic. The commander's hands were steady, his mind calculating every angle, every possible trajectory, every flaw in the enemy's search pattern. Time stretched and contracted, each second elongated by tension. The submarine glided through the water like a predator through a shadowed jungle, silent, lethal, and almost invisible. Every man aboard felt the weight of responsibility, not just for their own lives, but for the larger war effort that depended on their survival. Hours became a day, and still the submarine pressed on. The crew rotated through their stations with precision, maintaining a balance between rest and vigilance. In the cramped quarters, conversations were minimal, broken only by operational commands or the occasional sigh of exhaustion. Sleep was a luxury, focus was a necessity. The psychological toll was immense. Men had to suppress fear, maintain calm, and perform with mechanical precision, even as isolation and stress gnawed at the edges of their resolve. The human element of submarine warfare was as dangerous as any torpedo or depth charge, a constant struggle against the mind's natural response to danger. By the second day, the crew had begun to adjust to the rhythm of survival. Meals were simple, brief, and taken in shifts. Equipment was checked and rechecked. The commander held regular briefings, ensuring every man understood their role in the coming maneuvers. Morale was cautiously high, confidence born of the previous night's success, but tempered by the reality of continued danger. They were hunters, yes, but also prey. The duality of this existence created a constant undercurrent of tension, a reminder that every victory was temporary, every mistake potentially fatal. Meanwhile, intelligence reports began to filter in. Radio operators intercepted faint Japanese transmissions discussing the lost convoy and the mysterious submarine responsible. Their success had created ripples, drawing attention and increasing the enemy's vigilance. The commander understood that the ocean, vast as it was, had suddenly become smaller, more dangerous. Every movement now required calculation not just for survival, but to anticipate the enemy's reaction to their previous success. Strategy became paramount. Caution, ingenuity, and nerve were now as important as firepower. The submarine continued its mission, navigating toward a strategic choke point where enemy supply routes converged. The commander's orders were precise: remain undetected, observe enemy movements, gather intelligence, and strike if opportunity presented itself. Every man understood the gravity of their task. Each decision could tip the balance of an entire theater of war. The crew moved with a unity forged through shared danger, trust, and the stark reality that failure was not an option. As Part 3 draws toward its midpoint, the submarine reached the outskirts of the choke point. From sonar, the faint outlines of enemy vessels began to emerge: small cargo ships, lightly armed escorts, and patrol craft. The commander's mind raced with calculations, evaluating risk versus reward. He knew that a successful strike here could cripple the enemy's supply lines for weeks, but detection could mean destruction. The tension inside the submarine was nearly unbearable, a tangible pressure that seemed to compress every breath, every movement, every thought. The crew remained silent, waiting for the commander's decision, ready to execute with precision. He gave the order. Preparations were made. Torpedoes were readied. Every man knew his role. The submarine began a careful, deliberate approach, maneuvering into position with the grace of a predator circling its prey. Outside, the ocean was deceptively calm, masking the danger lurking beneath its surface. The crew moved as one, silent and deadly, their focus absolute. This engagement would not only test their skill, but their nerves, their courage, and their ability to remain calm under the most extreme pressure. The stage was set for another confrontation, one that would etch their actions into the annals of naval history. The ocean stretched endlessly in every direction, calm on the surface, yet hiding a world of danger beneath. The submarine glided silently toward the choke point, a steel predator moving with calculated precision. Above the waves, the first outlines of the Japanese convoy appeared, faint shadows at first, sharpening with each passing minute. Inside the submarine, every ripple of current, every faint sonar echo carried meaning. Detection meant death, and the men knew it. In the control room, tension was carved into every face. The commander stood rigid over the sonar display, eyes tracing the convoy's formation. Around him, the crew worked with mechanical discipline. No wasted words, no unnecessary movements. The sonar operator's fingers danced rapidly across the console, interpreting pings that revealed distance, speed, and direction of the ships above. They had trained for this moment countless times, but no simulation could mirror the real fear of facing enemy steel in the open ocean. The convoy soon filled the periscope lens, cargo ships lumbering forward, flanked by sharp, alert escorts. Smoke drifted from their funnels, but they had no idea a silent threat stalked them from below. The commander calculated torpedo angles, detonation depths, and escape routes with ruthless clarity. A single degree of error could doom them all. Orders were issued in low, steady tones. Torpedo tubes were armed, magnetic detonators checked twice, depth settings adjusted with expert precision. The submarine slowed, positioning itself perfectly. Inside, breaths were held as the commander gave a single nod. The first torpedo shot out, silent death cutting through the deep. Seconds dragged like hours. Then a dull, thunderous explosion rolled through the water. The submarine trembled as the blast echoed against its hull. Above, chaos erupted. Ships burst into flames, debris raining down, alarms screaming across the enemy convoy. But victory came with danger. The submarine dove instantly as the escorts retaliated. Depth charges exploded in rapid succession, violent shockwaves hammering the vessel. Lights flickered, hull plates groaned, and the crew braced against the trembling steel around them. The enemy was furious, relentless, determined to crush the predator that had struck from the shadows. Sonar pings grew louder, closer. The commander ordered evasive maneuvers, guiding the submarine through underwater valleys and rock formations. In the engine room, crewmen fought to maintain speed and pressure, sweat pouring down as machinery strained under extreme stress. Every man understood that a single mistake could mean never seeing the surface again. Hours passed under relentless pursuit. When darkness finally fell, the submarine surfaced briefly for air and repairs. The sea looked calm, almost peaceful, betraying none of the violence that had unfolded. The crew whispered updates, exchanged exhausted glances, and tried to rest, though sleep came only in fragments, haunted by memories of explosions and steel twisting under pressure. By dawn, they were moving again, silent, focused, and aware that the enemy was still searching. The convoy was destroyed, but the war was far from winning. The psychological weight of survival hung heavy in the submarine's narrow corridors. Yet the men remained resolute. They had endured the Pacific's fury and the enemy's wrath, and they would face whatever came next with the same unyielding resolve. The dawn rose gently over the Pacific, its pale light brushing across a sea still trembling from the violence of the days before. Beneath that calm surface, the submarine moved like a silent phantom, scarred, exhausted, but unbroken. Inside, the crew carried the weight of survival on their faces. Weeks of tension, explosions, and narrow escapes had hardened them, yet strengthened their resolve. They knew the war wasn't over, but this mission was reaching its decisive end. Sonar pings echoed softly as the commanders studied the data. A heavily guarded enemy convoy, loaded with fuel and ammunition, was moving through the region. Destroying it meant crippling enemy logistics. Failing meant being hunted until destroyed. The stakes had never been higher. In the dim control room, orders were whispered with the precision of a ritual. Every man understood his role. Every movement was deliberate. The submarine positioned itself beneath the convoy. Torpedo tubes flooded. Depth set. Silence thickened. With a final nod, the commander gave the order. The first torpedo launched with a quiet hiss. Moments later, a distant explosion rolled through the water. Flames erupted above, followed by chaos, alarms, shouting, and frantic evasive maneuvers by the Japanese escorts. More torpedoes followed, striking with brutal accuracy. Ships buckled, capsized, and vanished beneath plumes of fire and smoke. But victory brought consequence. Depth charges rained into the ocean, shaking the submarine violently. Lights flickered, metal groaned, and the hull trembled as shock waves slammed into it. In the engine room, men gripped railings, adjusting power, sweating, shouting orders over the roar. Yet the vessel held. Through underwater canyons and shifting currents, the submarine evaded detection, its crew executing every maneuver with near-perfect instinct. Hours later, as dusk settled, the last enemy ship sank in a bloom of fire. The convoy was destroyed. Supply lines crippled. The mission, against all odds, was a success. The submarine slipped away into the night. For the first time in days, there was silence. No explosions, no pursuit, no alarms. Only the steady hum of the engines and the soft rhythm of the ocean. Yet the psychological weight remained. The men spoke quietly, some reflecting, some simply breathing in the rare calm. They had seen destruction up close, delivered it, survived it. Each carried a private understanding of war's cost. When they finally returned to base, the welcome was solemn but proud. Reports were filed, damage assessed, and the crew was granted long-awaited rest. Their actions would soon become part of naval history, an example of strategy, courage, and the deadly efficiency of submarine warfare. The war continued, but this chapter had closed. As night fell over the Pacific, the crew looked out at the calm waters, waters that had threatened, protected, and witnessed everything. The submarine, once again silent and steady, prepared for whatever came next. Because in war beneath the waves, survival was never an ending, only a pause before the next descent into darkness.